I'm thrilled to be here for the very first live taping of the CSAIL Alliances podcast. And we're going to talk about something that I feel like has been ubiquitous this year, which is this question about AI and jobs and how it affects your time at work. And as you know, the answer is evolving. The evidence is being gathered. This is a very new topic that people are thinking about. And we can look back to other technologies, whether it's electricity, whether it's a personal computer, to think about how might those technologies tell us about what's going to happen and to what degree is this time different. I'm here with two of the great minds on this topic. David Autor is professor of economics at MIT. He's also co-author of The Work of the Future from MIT Press. And Neil Thompson is director of the FutureTech research project at CSAIL and a principal research scientist at the MIT Initiative on the Digital Economy. Thanks to you both for being here.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
So I want to talk about both how AI will change the job picture in general and then, individually sort of how it might change people's days. But since both of you think about this question a lot, I wonder how in the last year or two you feel like your own thinking about AI and jobs has shifted. Either of you can jump in.
So for me, I think the one moment that for me was a big change was there was a successive set of generations that OpenAI released their large language models. And the performance on things like the LSAT, right, this test of measuring how good lawyers are, just jumped, from like the 20th percentile of humans to like the 80th percentile of humans in that score. And that idea that in that short a window we'd had that rapid progress was a surprise to me. I mean, I knew that we were, that the people were building these models and things would get better, but the fact that in some places we had that kind of rapid change was surprising. And of course, at the moment I thought, oh, well, boy, is this going to happen really fast? No, of course, we're now seeing like other areas are moving slowly as well. And so, but that was definitely a moment that changed my view of like, oh, okay, in some specific areas, things were moving pretty quickly.
So, as labor economists, I've been thinking for literally 2 decades about how technology interacts with demands for human skills. And actually something that was very important is, a conversation Neil and I had a year ago, January. And we were talking about sort of, there's a lot of work on the exposure of jobs to AI. And we're trying to say, well, what does exposure mean? We're really exposed. This is great. Many people are exposed and they're very terrified. And I think, we sort of said, oh, it really matters not just if you're exposed, but how. Is this technology going to automate your kind of supporting tasks and allow you to work more efficiently on the things that you're really good at? Or is it going to take your expert tasks and commoditize them so anyone can do them without you? And it really matters. And so the work that we've actually been doing collaboratively since that time has been trying to characterize how expertise will change in different jobs as a function, not just of how much they're exposed, but in what way. And I think this has been really crystallizing and helping me think more clearly about both the past and how previous technologies have interacted with what we're good at and what we're not good at, and how this one may also unfold.
I talked about how people are, including both of you, are actively thinking about this, trying to gather data, trying to figure out what are companies doing, what's working, what's not working. From your sense of what exists today, you hear all sorts of things. You hear people talking about, oh, this is replacing entry-level jobs. You hear people say, this is just not nearly what it's cracked up to be. What's your sense of what, the literature is telling you right now about what reality really is?
Why don't you tell them about reality?
So I think the messages here are very, very mixed. So a number of people have done work where they've tried to estimate, okay, well, actually how much of people's time is being used and how much more productive is it making them? And the answers are pretty small, right? And I think that's very consistent with many firms are sort of eager to get into this space and say, we want to invest in AI, and then they find, okay, it's actually a lot more work.
It's making people just a little more productive.
It's making them a little more productive, and I think very interestingly, so there's one of our colleagues, Anders Humlum, has some interesting work where he looks at it and he says, of the time people are using large language models, what are they using it for? And you find they're about half of the time they're using it for things that make them more productive. And you say, it's helping me generate new ideas or something like that. You say, fantastic. And the other half of the time they're doing stuff that is like overhead because you're doing AI. And so you're like, I want to make sure that it's not going to have a lot of bias. I want to make sure that it's not creating problems in other ways. I want to do quality control on what it's producing. All of those things come as overhead. And so this lines up with one of my favorite studies on this. So you may know computer programmers are one of these professions that people have been most sure that it's going to get changed. And I do think it will get changed, right? These tools are getting better. But almost all of the reports that people have on this are ones where they say, half of our code is being written by these systems, or we get being 20% more productive in writing these things. And there's this very nice study that Meter did where they actually looked at the full process of writing an update to a library, and a software library. And what they found was indeed the sitting down and writing the code part was made a lot faster. But there was all of this overhead you paid in writing the prompt well and checking the things and sitting idle while it was going on. And even though the people themselves were like, yes, I'm 20% better, more productive, they were actually 20% less productive overall if you actually measured it carefully, right? Now, I don't want to generalize this. This is not that I think that everywhere is going to be made less productive by AI, but I do think what it is telling us is, first of all, there are going to be a bunch of frictions. They're going to come in as we do it, and it's going to take a while. We're going to have to work through. And I had an interesting discussion with someone at a law firm a couple of months ago, and they were saying, they're now really all in on AI, but they said it took them years to figure out all of the specific prompts, all of the checks they needed to do to make it work efficiently for them.
I mean, maybe you can follow up on that. And I think in your piece in The Atlantic, David, you talked about that there can be this kind of cognitive, I don't know if cognitive decline is the right word. It sounds apocalyptic, but some sort of that sometimes people just offload their cognitive abilities to AI and they think they're doing a great thing, and really they're not as smart as they were.
Yeah, so there's a lot of evidence that people are too responsive to AI suggestions, and they kind of stop thinking critically. And this is a really serious design problem. I mean, one of the frontier questions in this area is, how should you design AI to collaborate with people? And I think the consensus is the wrong answer is just have AI tell people what to do. But then what is the right answer besides telling them what to do? And what does it mean for an AI to collaborate effectively with a person or vice versa? It means that it needs to leverage their expertise, right? The machine is good at some things, presumably the person is too. And so a good tool is one that allows you to use your expertise more effectively and to acquire expertise more efficiently. And that's a super hard problem. And it is the case that when people stop practicing things, their expertise kind of goes to seed, right? There's a kind of widely discussed study about gastroenterologists that finds that after just 2 months of using AI for diagnosis, their diagnostic skills decline. Now, maybe that's not a problem, right? I can't do long division the way I could do in 5th grade, and I was terrible at it then. But it doesn't matter, right? I don't need to. It's sort of irrelevant. But that may not be true for many of these things. So we have to, for airline pilots, we really want them to be able to fly a plane manually. We don't want them to be fully dependent on autopilot. So it matters whether their skills decline. And I think this is, so I think we're in very, very early days, the kind of pets.com days of figuring out how to use AI. And there were so many bad ideas in the early internet era that got so much funding, right? So pets.com was one, right? Poof. Do anyone remember Cosmo.com? It was a company that would deliver chocolate bars and ice cream to you late at night. There was no business model there, and yet somehow they had a competitor that was suing them for stealing their business model. And they were both gone after a little while. But the point is, people don't know how to use it well. And most people think, and this is kind of goes into what James Van Eek and I were writing about in The Atlantic, most people think it's an automation tool. We'll take what we're doing, and then the machine will do it for us better. Done. But actually, automation is extremely hard, right? Automation says we've got this whole thing mastered. We need no more human intervention. We don't have that many automation tools. Like your automatic transmission is an automation tool, the ATM thing that, the toll taker on the highway. But most tools are not that. Most tools are collaboration tools. They require you to have some knowledge and expertise to use them well, right? Stethoscope, good for a doctor, not useful for me. Chainsaw, right? Good for some, dangerous for many. All these tools, they amplify the value of your expertise. But that's not how people are often trying to use AI. They just want it to automate. And so there's a design challenge of figuring out how to use it collaboratively, how to take what people know and give that additional leverage and applicability and range. And that's a hugely important problem.
And if I can just build on this for a second, I want to emphasize how important this is about how we should expect AI to play out, because one of the things about these AI systems is getting a last little bit of performance is incredibly expensive. So if you say, like, I need a system that is 80% accurate, that might not be that expensive. If you need 90% accurate, it's a lot more expensive. If you need 99% accurate, it's vastly more expensive, right? This is sort of fundamental about how these systems learn. And this means that if you say, I need a system to be almost perfect, right, then it's very, very costly. And so many businesses, I think, are getting into this world where they say, I want to fully automate. And then they realize that it's just too expensive to do that. And for me, a story that really brought this home, we did a case study with an insurance company. And they said, when people get in a car accident, we want them to just take a picture of their car and we're going to process it with AI. We're going to fully automate it. We're going to send them a check. And the problem here is, you can imagine making a mistake here is very costly, right? You give someone too much money, they say, thank you very much. They put the money in their pocket and they go home, right? If you give them too little money, they get really upset. They take it to the garage quotes a really high number and you pay. So the insurance company pays on either side, right? If they make this. What they realized was they just simply did not have enough data. It was too expensive to build a model that was perfect. What they did was build a model that pre-filled the form, and then the expert human looked at it and said, that's right, oh, that's not right. It improved their efficiency by like a factor of 6 or 8, so they were enormously more productive, but you still needed the human at the last step to do that. And I think we're going to see that a lot of cases.
Let's go.
I should just emphasize one thing. And I think this applies to these adjusters. It will apply to computer programmers. It'll apply to customer service agents. There will be fewer of them doing more expert work, right? It will automate a lot of the supporting tasks, a lot of the form filling, a lot of the rough cut of something. But then that makes it more important that the person who's supervising, right, makes the right decision in the end. And I was at a conference that Neil hosted like 2 weeks ago. I was speaking with someone from Meta, and reacting to all these reports about the death of the software occupation. She said, look, no, we're still hiring programmers. We just don't need people who can do Java and HTML. We need people who can use Cursor and all these other software development tools. So we're hiring from the top of the stack. We're more selective. We're hiring fewer people. They need to be more expert.
Let's just go back to David. You had talked about things being tools being kind of interactive, right? That rarely are things fully automated. Yeah. You give a very interesting. You've written and talked about a very interesting example, CheXpert, and I wonder if you could talk about it. And you were talking about the medical field before, so let's stay in the medical field. And it actually is, in some ways, a very good tool, but it didn't work that well. So can you talk about what it does and why it didn't go as hoped?
Absolutely. So this is actually, CheXpert, chest x-ray expert, terrible name, no marketing firm involved, is a tool out of Stanford, and it's a machine, it's an AI that looks at x-rays and tries to say, do you see pleural effusion, do you see pneumonia, et cetera, do you see edema? And this is a great AI tool, right? Because there's no hard and fast lines. This is not a simple task. There's a lot of judgment involved, but you can train this machine on 10 times as many labeled scans as a person could look at in their lifetime, and it can make pretty good predictions. So on its own, just looking at x-rays, it does as well as 2/3 of radiologists just looking at x-rays. By the way, that's not how radiologists work, right? They look at all kinds of ancillary information. But it turns out radiologists do somewhat worse using this tool than they do on their own. Why is that? Well, the question arises, what happens, so the doctor and CheXpert, they're looking at the same information, right? So their opinions are going to be highly correlated, but they're not always going to agree. So what do they do? What does the doctor do when they disagree? Well, in cases where the doctor is uncertain, the machine will also be uncertain, but the doctor will tend to defer to the machine. When the doctor is very confident, the machine will be very confident, but if they disagree, which doesn't happen that often, the doctor will tend to override. Well, neither of those appears to be the right instinct. Right? When there's a lot of uncertainty, machines are bad with the edge cases because they don't reason, they just predict. Right? So they don't have a kind of a corpus of formal knowledge to help them, sort out the ambiguities. So they should probably override. On the other hand, when they disagree and there's a lot of certainty, the doctor say, well, this thing's seen, 100,000 times, so many more X-rays than I ever will. At least I should wonder, right? Why I think I'm right and why I think it's wrong. But the point is not that this isn't a good tool, but this isn't a good design in two ways. One is, of course, doctors never got like a flight simulator to figure out when they should trust this thing and when they didn't, right? It was just thrown out. This is so common with AI devices and medical devices as well. Looks good in the lab, works well against our training set, send it into the field. Lives are at stake, we'll see how that goes. But so one is there was no opportunity to learn, but the other is it's not really designed to collaborate. It's designed to tell you its opinion. But when experts look at some complex problem and one says A and the other says B, right? They don't have a gunfight. They don't flip a coin, right? They go to a blackboard and say, well, why do you think A? Because I see B. And they may come out saying both agreeing on C, right? But CheXpert wasn't designed to interact in that way. Now it could be, and maybe the newer one will be. So this, again, it's not a limitation of AI. It's a challenge of designing it in a way that collaborates effectively with human capacities.
Neil, you talked before about the mistakes, like the error rate of, we can talk about LLMs for the moment. And I wonder if you worry about, most people have jobs where they would like to be right about the thing they're doing. I don't care. Financial analyst, doctor, they want to be right versus wrong. How much is it a problem that if you try to integrate AI into the way you do things, sometimes it's going to be wrong. That's what we've seen so far.
Yeah, so there are two examples that I think of here, which for me are very informative. So one of them is I was having a discussion with a pharmaceutical executive, and one of the problems they have is once they release a drug into the world, they collect reports on adverse effects that are happening, and they have to process those and send them to the FDA to say what's going on. And so they said, this is a huge amount of paperwork, there's a huge amount of processing. They said, we want to use AI for this. And they very quickly changed their mind. And they said, no, because the problem is, if you report something wrong to the FDA on this, if you do a bad job on this, there's a huge amount of liability, right? Because you're sort of, were you hiding something? What was going on here, right? And so they said, no, absolutely. We cannot afford to have that level of uncertainty. We need to have people checking all of those details. So for them, it was really important. On the other side, there was a nice Stanford study a little while ago that was looking at writing up doctors' notes. So famously, doctors have terrible handwriting, right? And at the end, somebody has to write that up and put it into the medical record. And people actually checked this, and they said, okay, well, how good are these systems at doing it? And they outperform humans. Not because they're perfect, because humans are pretty terrible at it, right? And so that's the case where, yes, there's some hallucination rate or some mistake rate, but humans are making lots of mistakes as well. The system is better. And so here, I think, we're going to have both of these scenarios. And one of the advice that I often give to business people is you need to understand which of these scenarios you're in, because if you're in the I need every last inch of accuracy in order to do well, you're talking about an entirely different system, an entirely different design than if you're in a world where you're like, we're just not that good at it. Let's see if the system can do it and do it maybe more cheaply or better.
David, does that explain to you the phenomenon that's been talked about, but may not be true, but the notion that, well, maybe the 23-year-old marketer isn't that good and gets things right only 70% of the time, we could maybe replace that person or some of those people with AI, but the 38-year-old marketer, that person has connections in the industry, they have an overall sense, they know much more. They're hard to replace. Does that make you think about the sort of hollowing out of the entry-level position?
Well, I do think that using AI for many things puts a premium on human judgment, right? That you have to be the one who's arbitrating and filtering and deciding, is this good? Is this bad? Is this reliable? And and so it does complement people who know what they're doing. But you can't have a world where everyone hires only experienced workers, right? How are they going to get experience, right? That's just not viable. Like, we could stop hiring people for the next 30 years, but then everyone would retire and there'd be no one left with experience. So I think this is an organizational challenge. But, and it's something Neil and I have written about recently, right? There are ways we overcome this challenge, right? We have lots of programs to get people skills before they enter the labor force, right? So if you want to become a doctor, right, you spend many years in a residency program, taking incredibly low wage, right, and working 100 hours a week to get training. We have apprenticeships for all kinds of skilled trades, and many of our, being an assistant professor is being an apprentice, being a junior lawyer. So I think this is a solvable problem. I do not think we are in a world where the ladder is being pulled up and there'll be no one can reach the first rung anymore. I think that's unlikely.
I wonder if either of you question the notion. I've certainly talked to both economists and people in corporate America who actually question the notion at all that the reason that we're seeing the hollowing out of the first rung has to do with AI. I mean, I think there's some question as to whether, when you're a corporate leader and you say, the reason we're not hiring or the reason we're trimming is because AI, it makes you sound so forward-looking. But if you say the reason we're not hiring is because, the market's not that good for our product, or we don't really know what to do with these tariffs, it makes you sound confused. I wonder if you think there's some AI gloss where maybe it shouldn't be.
Yeah, so I definitely think there is. I think the sort of productivity effects that at least we've seen are not really consistent with the level of things that people are ascribing to it. I think there's probably also a second thing going on, which is, corporate leaders are trying to push their people to use AI more, right? And one of the ways you can do that is just by say, you want to hire someone? Well, how about you use AI for it? I'm not going to let you hire someone, right? So I think there's a little bit of sort of organizational push that people are trying to do in this as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's a widely discussed study, called Canaries in the Coal Mine, that sort of suggests there's this big slowdown in hiring of young people in, quote, AI exposed fields. But I think there's limitations to that evidence. So this slowdown starts in April of 2022, so kind of 6 months before ChatGPT is released. And it seems to apply actually broadly across these fields, not just to young people, but whenever you slow down hiring, the incumbent stock of workers starts to get older just because people do. And even the occupations that you see this happening in tend to be very cyclical. So I think, I don't want to say nothing is happening, but I think the kind of apocalyptic media reporting is way, way ahead of the evidence.
I know you've both thought about how previous waves of technology and automation, what they can tell us about what's going to happen. Are there technologies that you look at and think about how things unfolded and compare it to now, or what tea leaves can they offer us?
So maybe I can start with some work that David and I have been doing recently about automation over the last 40 years and thinking about what effect that had. And then maybe I can pass the baton to you to talk about the routine part of it, because you've done a lot of really wonderful work even before our stuff on this. So one of the things we thought about is this question of, okay, well, if automation comes in and it automates some of what you're doing in your job, is that a good thing or a bad thing, right? Our assumption is it's a bad thing, right? We think wages are going to go down, we're going to lose our job, demand is going to disappear for this job. But that's only part of what's going on, and we see that in our daily lives, right? We all have things where we're like, I used to do this, now spell check does this for me. I'm pretty happy that spell check does this for me, right? That makes me more productive, not less. I don't worry about my job because of that. And that actually turns out to be a more general thing. When the tasks that you're doing get automated, and as I say, we've looked at this sort of over decades, the tasks that you're doing get automated, and they're the least expert tasks that you're doing, that tends to make you more productive and actually raises your wages, right? So a very specific example of this, proofreaders, if you look at them, they do a whole bunch of stuff. Part of what they did got automated, but the stuff that was left was detailed, right? You had to think carefully about, okay, what is the argument that someone's making? How do you give them feedback to make their whole piece better, right? That was the more expert part of what they were doing. There were now fewer of them, but they were getting paid more to actually do it. So automation helped their wages. Conversely, at the other end, you have cases like taxi drivers, right? So for taxi drivers, like the most expert thing they had was knowledge of the city. They knew all the little roads and how to get to places. All of a sudden, GPS comes in, and it takes away the most valuable piece of expertise that they have. That means that someone can now walk in off the street and drive a taxi cab pretty well. It became much less expert. So their wages did go down, but the number of them didn't go down. The number of them went up, right? We all know the number of Uber drivers that are out there today, right? And so this idea of, actually, depending on what task gets automated, you're either going to be in the camp of your wages go up, but there are fewer of you, or your wages go down, but there are more of you. That's a much more complicated story that's going to change the mix of what people are doing, but doesn't necessarily mean that we're sort of losing all work tomorrow.
Do you want to add anything to that?
Sure. So, I mean, it's when people ask, is this time different? I mean, the correct answer is, of course, every time has been different. So a better question is like, what is different about it? And I think if the last wave of automation, the last 50 years of computer, is it's useful to think of it in the simplest terms as we were able to write down procedures to carry out tasks that we fully understood all the rules and steps, such that a non-sentient, non-creative, non-improvisational machine could do that work for us, right? Whether that's calculating a spreadsheet, doing repetitive motion on an assembly line, sorting and filing and copying, and that's been amazing. And we've gotten 5 decades out of that. But there's a real limitation to what you can do with that, because there are many, many things that we do that we don't know the rules and procedures for doing them, right? We understand them tacitly, but we don't understand them explicitly. Like, you can make a funny joke, but you don't know the procedure, right? You couldn't write a program to make a funny joke, or to recognize a face that you haven't seen in 4 decades, or to look at a room that you've never been in and say what on the floor is trash and what is someone's belongings, right? If you were cleaning a hotel room. And so that was really a kind of a hard upper limit on many of the things that could be automated. And what's different about AI is that it doesn't need the explicit rules. It learns inductively like we do, right? It infers from unstructured information what are the regularities that it can generalize. And so that opens a whole new realm of activities to automation or augmentation that just weren't feasible before. Now, in many ways, I think this comes at the right time. We've really kind of hit the upper limit of what we can do with this proceduralization, and that was actually much more useful in things like manufacturing. But we've kind of played that one out. Like you can now buy a TV larger than your house for $99, at Walmart. But that's not that useful to you, because most of your money now goes to your education, to your healthcare, to your lawyer, right, to your architect, to a contractor, right? All these expensive human capital, labor-intensive services. And those they don't follow well understood rules and procedures, right? They require tons of professional judgment. And what AI is really good for is a tool to supplement decision-making, to provide guidelines and guardrails, and to help more people do that work better. So if we can do healthcare more effectively with less expensive people and more of them, or education, or design, or skilled repair, or people who are, maintaining aircraft can do a broader range of aircraft engines because they have more supporting tools, that's amazing. So it's hard to predict exactly how this will play out, because it's really a different set of capabilities. It's not a better, cheaper, faster version of anything we've ever had before. But there's enormous potential as well as risk.
Do you think, one of the things we've seen, particularly in the last year, is that there's a lot less immigration to the U.S., and this is an aging country, and we don't have that many children, not as many as we used to. I was looking at some statistics from the San Francisco Fed recently, and they thought that it looks to be that there will be a quarter of the immigration in 2025 as there was in 2024, and that's a big shift. Does that, to you, factor into your thinking about AI, or do you think, like, no, it's not going to help us replace those people? I wonder if AI factors into your thinking about this or not.
Sure. So, all of the industrialized world is having a baby bust, right? I mean, the U.S. is not even nearly an extreme example. Much of, if you look at Singapore, South Korea, China, Japan, right? These are incredibly rapidly aging societies because fertility is so incredibly low. Births per replacement fertility is 2.1 births per woman over the lifetime. In Singapore, it's like 1.1 right now. We are going to have, and what is the problem with that? Well, it creates a real demographic challenge because you have many people who have earned a retirement, and you have fewer working age people to generate the income to support them. So we do need we need to respond to that. Now, immigration is a great way to do that, right? It lowers prices, it produces goods and services, and it's great for the immigrants, right? Our scarcity of humanity in the industrialized world is completely a self-imposed choice, right, to not allow millions and millions of people from the rest of the world to come to our countries. But this appears to be the choice that we're making. I do think, given that, yes, things that make us more productive and allow us to do more will be very helpful. And there is evidence that aging countries adopt robotics faster. For example, China, Korea, Japan, Italy, these are countries that have higher robot density than the United States, for example. Part of the reason is they're dealing with the scarcity of young people. So, but again, Lance Pritchett, economist at the Kennedy School, he likes to say, imagine, look at my super cool snowblower. It's so unfortunate that this is so super cool that I'm spending all this money on this great machine when there are all kinds of people who would like to shovel my snow, but I'm not allowing them into the country. So it will respond to it, but I don't know if this is the optimal way to respond.
I think what I would add to that is that we are at a moment where, as AI becomes an incredibly powerful tool, not just for businesses but for science, right? We're seeing enormous adoption of these AI tools. It's an incredible moment to bring in the best talent to work on these questions. And we've looked, my lab has looked historically at this question and said, we see important innovations in computing, like who is actually inventing them? And a disproportionate number of them for decades has been in the United States. But if you went back to the 50s and 60s, those were by people born in the United States, working in the United States. Now it's overwhelmingly people working in the United States, but who were born abroad. And that cornucopia of wonderful ideas and prosperity that we've gotten from the brightest minds coming to the U.S., we have that advantage and we are losing it.
Let me touch on something that we have not touched on yet, which is when people think about AI, I think in the popular imagination, they think about large language models. But really, AI is not just large language models. And I wonder, Neil, to what degree you think, wow, the really exciting stuff is in large language models, or like, no, I know you're all looking at like what the next Gemini, ChatGPT thing is, but that's not where the real action is going to be.
Yeah, so I'm going to go with maybe both and, I think, in this case. So I certainly think large language models, particularly in their ability to automate things that we haven't been able to automate before, some of that capabilities won't be enormously important. But I also think that there is just enormous capabilities in the underlying technology. So, the sort of underlying algorithm that runs AI is called deep learning. And there have been some amazing discoveries that have been done here. So probably the one that's best known here is protein folding. So this was a case where traditional computer programs were quite bad at this task. We actually had like large numbers of humans doing this thing in the past. These new systems are vastly beating the humans. They're incredibly good at it. That helps us understand the building blocks of chemistry and more generally of life. That's incredibly important for us to be able to do good work. But you also see things like, just the other day, there was some research out showing that Google's weather prediction system outperformed a huge number of other models that had gone for predicting what was happening during hurricane season, right? Those kind of things are incredibly important because it turns out that actually modeling all that's going on with weather is incredibly hard, right? There are lots of phenomena where we think, oh, we understand parts of this, but we don't understand all of it. A system that can statistically learn in the way that deep learning is good at can pull out patterns that we can't otherwise see and help us make predictions for incredibly important things. And so I think more broadly, if we look at this, those places where we're going to get brand new capabilities, I think that's an incredibly exciting area, and I look forward to lots more discoveries we're going to have from it.
I'll ask you a follow-up on scaling, which you talked about a little bit before, like the huge amount of compute you have to throw at things. Does it worry you, like, that what we've seen over the last couple of years, and I mean, this is at the intersection of AI and the financial markets, but that people just keep throwing stuff at it, and they're like, if we need nuclear, then let's go to nuclear power to power this stuff. Is that either a direction that's wrong and we shouldn't go in, or is like the amount of scaling, does it not make sense?
Yeah. So for those who sort of haven't been following this, there's this part of AI called scaling laws, which basically says that as your model gets bigger and you get more data, you're able to do much better with it. And we can see this playing out all over the place. So if you actually look at the models that OpenAI and others are building, you see that the larger models are able to perform better. If you look in science, when scientists are using bigger models, they tend to publish in better journals and get more citations. Like, there are lots of things that correlate with having these bigger models and then being able to do more. So if I think then about the future of it, there's part of it that I'm not at all worried about, which is, like, in many of these cases, the benefit that we're going to get from these models and their usage is way larger than the amount of compute that we're going to use. And so that's pretty great, right? And so we obviously need to then think about, how do we implement it? How do we build solar panels rather than using more natural gas or coal or something like that? But I think, if we can create more prosperity for society, let's figure out how to manage that in a good way. I do think, however, that scaling does also provide the limits. So we talked earlier about this idea that for some tasks, getting that last bit of performance is really expensive. That is exactly this playing out, right? This is like, oh, do you really want to build a model that is 1,000 times bigger and uses 1,000 times more data? All of those things are expensive, right? That might not be justified by a particular task. And so I think these sort of computational limits on what deep learning can do will also be a constraint on where this automation is going to come.
The other thing I'd like to add to that is, I don't think Neil means this, but someone might hear that and said, well, if we just had enough compute, we would just get to AGI just through scaling. And I don't personally think that's true. And Neil may disagree or may agree, but I think these models are, have incredible capabilities, but they're fundamentally not converging to all the capabilities that humans have. We have other capacities that are different from what these tools do, and it's amazing. It's amazing what they can do, but it's also amazing what they can't do. Like, if you just go to your, large language model and say, draw me a picture that doesn't include a dog, you will get a picture of a dog. Why is that? Because they're not trained on images of not dogs. Things that are labeled, they're labeled dog, they're not labeled no dog in this picture, right? Now, you wouldn't have this problem, right? You could tell the difference, but so it's a different type of reasoning. It's not more compute is not going to make that fundamental problem go away, I don't think. So there are big breakthroughs still to be had if we are going to get to AGI. I don't think that's in any sense the most important goal, by the way, right? Simply replicating human capabilities. We have lots of human capabilities, right? A great tool gives us human capabilities we do not possess, right? Like, flight is not an improvement on, a human capability. It's something that we didn't have, right? Telecommunications, penicillin, right? All kinds of tools. So simply building more powerful humans seems to me less important than many of the actual problems that we have that involve extending things way beyond our own human capacities, not just making better, cheaper, faster people, but different capabilities.
So for me, I would say I'm more agnostic than I think you are. I think that I have definitely been surprised over the last 5 years of stuff where I thought, oh, okay, actually this is pretty challenging. Are these systems going to be able to do it just because we scale up and have more data? And they have been. And you can imagine the dog example. You can build artificial examples that say this is not a picture of a dog. This is also not a picture of a dog. Like you can imagine someone training it. And so the question for me is not sort of just like could these systems do a lot? I think as they get bigger, I think they are going to become more and more capable. But is the cost of them becoming better so great that actually that's not the path we're going to do? And so are we going to need to have sort of fundamentally more efficient ways to get more powerful systems? And so, there's other types of AI called like symbolic AI and things like that, where we might say, we have large language models for part of what we're doing, and we have these more efficient techniques for other parts of what we're going to do.
I just want to emphasize one thing. Neil's making a point that you hear very infrequently, but so important, which is that the economics of this determine what we do with it, not just the technological capabilities, right? So there are many, many things already that could be automated. They're not automated because we have cheaper alternatives. And so this will determine, and this is not a moral argument by any sense. I'm saying incentives drive a lot of what goes on. If you ask people, what are they sure AI will it improve world peace? Will it improve education? Will it improve healthcare? Will it, give us more leisure time? The one thing people are confident of, they're certain, is it will speed scientific progress. Why is that? Well, there's a very strong economic incentive to, create more patents, to produce more information, produce more knowledge. There isn't such a strong incentive to improve people's health or their education or to reduce, global malnutrition. So thinking about this in terms of not just what is feasible, but what is cost effective or where the incentives run is a very good guide to understanding where it goes.
And if I can add just one more quick addendum here, I think this is such an important point because so much of the discussion about AI talks about this idea of AI exposure. And what that usually means is this idea of we've looked at the capabilities AI has or capabilities that AI could have, and we think, this actually lines up with some of those things. Like there's a language task, it's analyzing data that's there, I think it could do it. That's all fine, right? But if you actually haven't looked at the economics, then you don't know, like, are we actually going to do that task? Is that going to happen soon? And when we've looked at that, we find that many tasks that people say like have AI exposure, you might not expect to have, for at least 10 years and maybe 20 years of stuff be actually automated because you need an enormous amount of cost decrease before you'd actually want to put those in place.
I know you talk to folks all the time about AI and read stuff a lot about it. I wonder in the last year or two what you feel like is one of the most effective uses of AI that you've come across. Could be in a law firm, could be in a hospital, whatever, doesn't matter, call center.
Sure. So actually, I love this example. A great paper by Mitch Hoffman, who's an economics professor at UC Santa Barbara. And, in China, there are 200 million gig workers, right? So that's 50 more million workers than there are all workers in the United States. So 200 million gig workers. And a small percentage of them are hearing impaired. And when you do food delivery in China, it's expected that you call, you don't text. I don't know why, but that is the custom. And hearing impaired workers get more complaints, and they're less able to problem solve because of their hearing impairment. So the company that does this food delivery, just as a side project, developed a little tool that asks you if you're hearing impaired. If it is, it offers to, basically the AI will do a lot more speaking for you and call the customer. It doesn't solve all the problems, but just this little technological improvement basically improve the efficiency of the hearing impaired drivers and reduce their complaint levels to that of the non-hearing impaired drivers. And what's actually interesting is there aren't that many opportunities for hearing impaired workers in the workforce, not that forgiving. And so many of them work longer hours and spend more months on this platform than other workers. And yet previously were getting more complaints and lower pay and had lower productivity. And now that evens that out. It's a tiny example, right? But it just shows like this is not automation, right? This is a new capability. This is extending the capability where a human capability was falling short, and just how impactful that is in that one small case.
So the example I want to highlight is actually an example that's for quite a number of years ago, but when Google first bought DeepMind and brought in some of those AI capabilities, one of the applications that they did early on was they said, can we actually put this in our data centers and have this deep learning system help us control the cooling of those data centers? And this to me was such an interesting idea because there are enormous numbers of incredibly highly paid people whose whole purpose is to say, how do we cool these centers? And a significant portion of the electricity budget for these data centers comes from the cooling of them. So it's an incredibly impactful thing for energy demand. And what they found was these systems were able to learn from the flows of wind around there, like what actual systems were turned on and stuff, to vastly decrease the amount of power that was needed to cool these places. And so that's one where, again, you have this sort of frontier of human knowledge where we know we don't understand all of the flow of air in a very good way. People instrumented it well, had good signals, put that into this deep learning system, and were able to do vastly better. I think that's pretty exciting.
David Autor, Neil Thompson, thank you so much. Thanks to the museum and to CSAIL Alliances, and thanks to all of you for coming out on not the best night. I really appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you, guys.